And shout out to MS. Thank you again for this. Let's bring it to your attention. And here it is. So this is something we just talked about on the previous segment. Let's go ahead and full screen this. European Union, Japan Economic Partnership. If you're wondering where this is from concilium.europa.eu. All you got to do on your search is type in EU-Japan Economic Partnership, okay? This is from January 31st, 2024. Again, a few months ago, but again, boy, did this fly under the radar. EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement. EU and Japan sign protocol to include cross-border data flows. Remember how we just talked about what's going to happen with that protocol? On behalf of the European Union, the Belgian presidency of the Council has signed this protocol to include provisions on cross-border data flows in the agreement between the European Union and Japan for an economic partnership. Look what it says in regards to the protocol. It will provide a greater legal certainty, ensuring that data flows between the European Union and Japan will not be hampered by unjustified data localization measures. Remember how we talked about like cutting out all that bureaucratic nonsense? But it's going to ensure the benefit from free flow of data according to the European Union and Japan's rules on what? Data protection and the digital economy. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, but I was talking about how WorldCoin, right? WorldCoin, by the way, I'm not into WorldCoin, okay? I just want to throw that out there. But remember how Spain basically put like a cease and desist order on WorldCoin, right? Again, guys, action, reaction. Here's another example of why we want to pay attention to all this. So look at this. Data protection, digital economy. And there's this lady. She is Haja Labib, Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Affairs, and Foreign Trade. And here's the quote. This is a very important achievement, as the European Union and Japan are among the largest digital economies in the world. Data governance and cross-border data flows are crucial to the development of digitalization and the global economy and society. Guys, we have to look at this again. Okay, so for one, data governance. All right, when we talk about, for example, why Jasmy put so much emphasis on being regulatory compliant, the first to be regulatory compliant, why that was such a big deal. Here's another person that basically indirectly references that, if you really think about it. Okay? What about cross-border data flows? Think about this for a second. So Jasmy, when we talk about IoT, is obviously a big thing. But we also have to always reference the whole thing of we finance democracy. You know, when is the world finally going to take Jasmy a little bit more serious when it comes to cross-border data flows, or data finance democracy, I should say, right? Says it's crucial. Yeah, it is crucial. Global economy, society what? 5.0 maybe? I don't know. But what are the next steps about this? Quite a few. Talks about all the way back in September 2022, the Council approved negotiating directives for the Commission to negotiate the inclusion of provisions on cross-border data flows in the agreement between the European Union and, of course, Japan for economic partnership. The negotiations were concluded in principle on the 28th of October 2023, last fall. But not that long ago, on December 1st, 2023, the Commission itself transmitted proposals for Council decisions on the signature and conclusion on behalf of the European Union of the proposal of amending, and you read that right, amending the EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement regarding free flow data. Or if you're in Japan, data free flow with trust. Now, look at this. On January 29, 2024, the Council adopted the decision on signing of the protocol to include provisions on cross-border data flows in agreement between the EU and even Japan for economic partnership. The Council is decided to send the decision to ratify the protocol, of course, to Parliament for its approval. And from there, what's going to happen? The agreement has to be ratified by Japan and the two sides have notified each other about the completion of their internal procedures, it can enter into force. Again, we kind of share, but elaborate just a little bit more, and especially hearing it from somebody who's like, a government official, right? European affairs and foreign trade. When are we going to take Jasmy more serious when it comes to foreign trade? I'm being really serious about that. We all have our examples of coins that are tied into the trade sector: VeChain, Morpheus Network, XDC, so on and so forth. When do we start including Jasmy? Be glad that you don't have one utility layer when it comes to the concept of Jasmy, right? Stop the screen on this. I want to elaborate on this for a second. My key takeaways of what was just presented in the outline. So, again, shout out to MS. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate all of the detailed info that you sent. But this partnership, if you want to call it, this agreement, the EU, Japan, right? Cross-border data flows. This particular person, right, from, this council, right? This whole thing of, man, EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement. Why does it really, really matter? Well, we got into some of these things, but let's elaborate on just a bit. You guys know how to do it. 3 key points of why we're paying attention to this tonight. So this is significant, guys, for many reasons. But what caught my eye is these reasons. It will boost digital trade. And you have to keep in mind that eliminating unnecessary restrictions on data movement itself does in fact help businesses in the European Union and obviously Japan. And they're going to find how easy it's going to be to trade. How, guys? Digitally speaking. It's going to lead to increased innovation, economic growth in both regions. It's a win for both regions big time. There's legal certainty. The protocol provides clear rules on data transfers, reducing legal risks, uncertainties, of course, for companies and those tied into the next era, right? Web3. And remember what I said in regards to that. The next era for Web3. Aren't we invested into the next era going from Web 2 to Web 3? The answer is yes. What about alignment with data protection standards? Even with something like Jasmy? Well, the agreement assures that data flows comply, of course, with the European Union, Japan, and of course, those regulations. But there's implications just like anything. We have to point this out. Can't just be rah, great news on everything. For the European Union and Japan, this agreement strengthens the digital ties, of course, between the EU and Japan, causing them to be positioned as leaders, in shaping global data governance standards. Like I was talking about earlier, somebody was asking about Casper, and I mentioned the whole thing, Casper, not Caspa, Casper with a hard R, CSPR. It's governance, guys. So that's AI governance. Casper and IBM. But we're talking about European Union and Japan shaping a global data governance and meeting those standards. And you have Jasmy, who was the first in Japan to reach those standards. Again, supply and demand, action, reaction, perfect example. Now, I understand, guys, for a lot of us, it's like we saw some cool things. How do we see some more cool things when it comes to Jasmy? And there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Well, it's to be expected. But the impact on Jasmy, while some of you guys feel as though it's less clear, understand why we mention some of these things with the research. And that basically is, we know that Jasmy is developing a blockchain platform for digital security and monetization. Hence, why you see all this stuff going on with Junction. And hence why you see all these, like the concept of a layer 2 with Optimism, and then, Web3 cloud storage solution with Polkadot and so on. But while increased data flows could, obviously benefit Jasmy services, you have to keep in mind, while we won't get specific details of the agreement and how it's going to impact like data security standards, we also need to realize that, the implications of all this stuff. How will it implicate Jasmy? Or will you see just Jasmy soar like it did before about a month and a half ago, when you saw it go out of 0.0056 levels, and into over 2 cents. I think this is another example of when it happens. I want you guys to keep in mind this agreement, while it's a positive development, you better believe it, there is this whole thing of how it will blossom, in my opinion, and how it will benefit the digital economies, not just of the European Union, but also for Japan. And that honorable mention of the United States, I know it sounds nuts, but it's going to be really interesting to see how it all impacts specific companies. And of course, obviously, Jasmy. But I feel as though it's going to open doors to like tremendous growth and what I like to refer to as a data-driven economy. Doesn't that sound good? I think it does. All right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump into the next particular part of what we have here. Let's take it to the CSIS. And do we have anything recent in regards to the CSIS? Now, I've cited these guys before. Okay. Let's go ahead and full screen this for you. And it says operationalizing data free flow with trust, right? AKA DFFT. And what you see here is what? The most recent about DFFT. Awesome. Yeah, that also flew under the radar. So, that was, of course, April 13th, 2023, right? But, it's from CSIS, which is a good thing to reference, right? Should say it's the most recent, but in reality it's from CSIS. The thing I wanted to bring to you guys is how this all came about, right? Where you see about specific data types, where you see about the whole thing about governance, interoperability, how to build on existing emerging governance models, such as cross-border privacy rules, CBPR. Again, some of this stuff was referenced in the white paper. And how you see where it says there's a single international organization to coordinate DFFT, composed of a permanent secretariat, government, consultative, this particular body, and the multi-stakeholders advisory body. Number 5, enable global multi-stakeholder input, build trust. You know how Gilbert Verdian's always talking about the internet of value and the internet of trust. And to build that among digital economy stakeholders, the need for trusted data flows. Look at this for a second. And here's some of your, I guess you say, your aha moments. It states the need for some of this stuff. Look at this for a second. This is good. You'll appreciate it. Global digital economy fueled by data. Any action taken to the digital economy, whether it be buying goods, selling a service, accessing a piece of information, requires the creation of transfer of data, and lots of it. More than 221 zettabytes of data. Remember how we talked about what that equates to? Is a lot, right? You think you got a lot with 1 terabyte hard drive? 1 terabyte equals 1,000 gigabytes. Man, nothing compares to some of this stuff. But look at this. Roughly enough to store 110.5 trillion movies. My goodness, like you watching movies forever, will exist in the world by 2026. Always interesting how they always reference 2026. And much of this data will flow across national borders. Cross-border data flows, not just to support digital economy, but the whole thing of invaluable for improving the efficiency and resilience of trade in goods and services, and what's also on the ground. Look at this. Cross-border data flows also, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but anyway, other key government and functions, efforts, safeguarding national security, track cross-border carbon emissions, and deliver global medical assistance. Now, despite all this, you have to keep in mind the transfer of data, and it goes on to mention this part that I want to get into, about what China is doing. So look at this. China is building out a digital regime predicated on authoritarian control. European Union is crafting a digital ecosystem shaped by heavy regulation. And the US even has a digital economy without comprehensive federal digital privacy legislation, at least not yet. But it's where this all leads into innovation and how it's parallel with countries like Japan. And again, back to the whole thing of interoperable digital economy. Back to the whole thing about DFFT. I want to talk about this, jump to this part. How did this all evolve? Well, back in 2019, former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, remember we talked about him? He pitched this whole idea about DFFT to the World Economic Forum. Remember that? And then also talking about like what we mentioned earlier about the United States, Japan, and so on. But it's the concept of DFFT, and it's to promote the free flow of data across borders, ensuring privacy, security, intellectual property. So we were now seeing how this all kind of pans out, you know? And, you know, when you talk about like guys like Michael Saylor, I'll come back into the screen for a second. You know, if you've seen like one of his interviews where he was interviewed like on CNBC, Fox Business and stuff like that, where he talks about, you know, Bitcoin, you should look at Bitcoin as not a currency. This is his own words, right? But you should look at it as being more like digital property. When you hear statements of that, of why people are so maxis on like, you know, BTC, it's like, well, you're a maxi on like the old tech. You know, anything that claimed the rights of like everything's going to be fine and just keep trusting in that current, old system, you know, nothing to see here, just move along, have trust in us. Without innovating, you're going to have a problem, right? Well, if the problem is already addressed and you have examples of this, then isn't it interesting to see what kind of value we would have? And yeah, I'm talking about Jasmy. Look at this for a second. We're going to go ahead and full screen this. It goes on to mention specifically about data protection, of course, privacy, but intellectual property rights, security, and the challenges of all this, the legal frameworks, the free flow with trust, and how we'll harness opportunities of that digital economy. How about this, guys? The role of data development and reaffirming the whole concept of a digital economy, but also understanding a joint statement initiative on electronic commerce. You know, work program on electronic commerce, of course, at the WTO. But the roadmap of how it all came together and how it was adopted by the G7, I thought was profound. And this part about how Japan infused DFFT into trade agreements. And it's not just like what we think on paper, it's US, Japan digital trade agreement. Very, very interesting. And it goes more into this. I don't want to get into all of this necessarily, but I will point out the regulatory track, okay? This will be the last part that I get into before we get into your main key takeaway of why you're here tonight. And that is this. When we talk about the G7, look at this for a second. Within the G7, divergent transatlantic digital privacy standards will be present to challenge DFFT's advancement. Back in 2016, listen to this, European Union adopted the GDPR. I saw this also referenced, I believe, in the white paper. But it was a stringent policy standard governing the data of the European Union citizens. Okay? And, you know, think about that for a second. You know, if you have the case where Spain literally said no more WorldCoin, well, does that create supply and demand for WorldCoin? No. But wouldn't it create supply and demand for something like Jasmy that embraces the concept of data privacy? You better believe the answer has to be yes. I want to take you now to this particular video because we talked about a lot of data free flow with trust. And this gentleman does just a really good job, just in case you're just connecting, of explaining the G7's pivotal role in data free flow with trust when it comes to shaping global data governance. How long ago was this published? Well, he made this basically back in September 26, 2023. But it's under 3 minutes. Hear what he has to say. We'll get back into my closing comments of this and then show you the highlight of the night. Will Jasmy do double the market cap of something like Ethereum? currently speaking, that sounds nuts. Anyway, watch this. Only provide information. Take it as you please. Here we go.
Data free flow of trust is a concept that former Japanese Prime Minister Abe proposed in the G20 in order to put data governance on the global agenda in an effort to drive discussions around the rules, norms, and values around data, as at the moment there are few rules or forums focused on this issue in a pragmatic way. Discussions of DFFT cover data privacy and data protection, along with security and intellectual property protection, among other issues. Ultimately, across these issues, the general goal is to work towards similar and compatible approaches as a way to set sort of global norms. And while DFFT started at the G20, it has shifted to the G7, given China and Russia's membership of the G20, and the fact that they just take fundamentally different approaches to data governance. And so the challenge is now for the G7 to bring DFFT to life. Most recently in Japan, G7 countries agreed to establish a permanent secretariat, which will hopefully help it focus discussions and bring it to life through pragmatic agreements and forms of cooperation. But a lot more still needs to be done to truly make DFFT a successful initiative for global data governance. DFFT's success is strategically important in global data governance, as it would provide a critical foundation for these countries to engage in a broader debate with a broader range of countries, as they already have demonstrated alignment. And so it would provide a platform for them to hopefully have a more effective impact in terms of shaping global data governance. However, if DFFT fails to come to life in a meaningful and pragmatic way, China and others will fill the vacuum created by this lack of these global digital norms and rules and agreements, with policies that are both protectionist and regressive from a human rights perspective. It would be a strategic mistake if G7 countries let this initiative slip by due to bilateral differences and conflicts, which in the grand scheme of things pale in comparison with the contrast they hold with China and other digital authoritarian countries. Hopefully G7 countries recognize this and find ways to work together to bring DFFT to life in meaningful and pragmatic ways to help shape global data governance.
It is from SEPA, okay? This guy that you just heard right here, his name is Nigel Corey. And like it says, unpacks the revolutionary concept of DFFT proposed by former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe way back at the G20 summit, I think in 2015, okay? But yeah, I mean, what's also interesting is, DFFT, the initiative that transition is primary focus from the G20 to the G7, especially considering China and Russia's distinct positions on data governance. Think about that for a second, right? So I want to give you guys a little conclusion on that. And basically speaking, in regards to my notes, DFFT, we understand for a while now the significance about someone, but just in case you're new, it has an important impact, obviously, when it comes to Jasmy, okay? About roughly 3 key things I want to get into just in case you're new. So here's why it's important. It's increased market opportunities. You have to keep in mind when it comes to DFFT, it leads to more open data flows, hence the term data free flow with trust, right? No pun intended. But Jasmy in itself will be able to potentially expand its reach, of course, to new markets. Have you not seen examples of that? Did we not get examples of that last year, especially when it came to Hong Kong and other areas of Southeast Asia? But it's these new markets where data monetization services, of course, are going to be more valuable, right? What about the standardization of data governance? Well, think about this in itself. You have to keep in mind that by standardizing data governance, we're going to see clear rules on just that. And it could very well create a more predictable environment for businesses, like, for example, Jasmy, that operate in the data space. No kidding. What about the potential for collaboration? Well, DFFT in itself might encourage collaboration between different countries, organizations on data related issues. It's not just Japan and European Union. Don't get it twisted. But it could lead to new opportunities for who? Yeah, that's right. Jasmy to partner with other stakeholders in the data ecosystem. You like that? When we talk about projects in blockchain and so on, right? That are creating an ecosystem. How would you like the idea of that DFFT and everything is connected with, whether it is blockchain and DLT, you can have it blanketed over to a thing that's referred to as a data ecosystem? That sounds huge, because if I'm going to cover things like Stellar with on and off ramps, then I need to also talk about a data ecosystem. Do you understand the bigger picture? I think you do. There's challenges, of course, like anything, that we must consider. And that is the complexity, of course, of the implementation. But I feel as though there's been so much to get into to show that it's happening literally, right? When we talk about proper regulations. So even though DFFT is a complex concept in itself, I get that, it requires agreement from many different countries when it comes to varying like the priorities of, I don't know, Belgium versus France, and France versus Germany, and Germany versus Sardinia and Albania or something, right? But you got to keep in mind, as far as advancing economies like those in the G7, well, while it may seem unclear how quickly the benefits of DFFT would extend to other countries, understand what we've already seen in regards to the examples we provided as outline about getting rid of the bureaucratic red tape. And if anything, getting rid of all the red tape you have to go through when it comes to your medical data. Like even here in the United States, it took me over a month to get my medical records. It shouldn't take that long. Cryptocurrencies tied into solid utility like Jasmy, when it comes to understanding, plowing through all the unnecessary red tape of creating like workflows or, bursting through medical data problems by having a solution, well, that should be worth a lot. And that's just one example of many. But overall, DFT, of course, as we know, has the potential to create even a more favorable environment, of course, for the likes of Jasmy and their business and what they're looking to do for the future. But it's the pace of this implementation. I get it. But my thing is this. It's the specific policies of DFFT that excite me the most, and why I wanted to bring you guys this information tonight. Because I feel as though that this should be the third most positive thing that's going to happen, right? I'm not saying it's buy the rumor, sell the news. It's just a matter of time. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When you paid attention about everything in regards to, bills becoming acts and those, things, how important that was, and seeing insane price action, then why wouldn't we want to pay attention to things like this? Some of you guys ask what cold storage solution I use. I use this, and it is the Decent wallet. All right. I also, of course, have a ledger like this. All right. You can get a discount basically from going into the affiliate link, which is in all the live video descriptions and recorded and so on. And for the yahoos that are out there, they're like, this is just a shield. And, Will Fix point this out, and it's a great point. Were you aware that you don't necessarily get a discount link just going straight to the site? No, you actually have to go through a platform like this. So how cool is that? I don't think anybody's complaining about that. But anyway, use the link, get a discount. There's another one here. If you're the type of person you want to get one for you and your significant other, you can get two of them. They actually have another promotion, which is this, and I think this is cool. You can get an all-in-one card wallet plus backup card package. Interesting. I thought that was cool. And again, one of the main key things I like about the Decent wallet is not having to do the red tape of jumping through all the hoops for XDC and the custom folder. I mean, Edward Vincent can vouch on that. Some of you guys can too as well in regards to Ledger. That was a pain in the butt. You don't have that problem. You literally open up your phone, it's on your app, track everything that's going on, right? And saying goes, not your keys, not your crypto. You know the drill. Check it all out though if you wish to do so. It is truly the cold storage solution that I use for the most part. There's still some on Ledger that, you know, I kind of split it up on and so on. So it is what it is. But if I have preference over one, I'm going with this one. A lot easier to use and so on. And some people, even to this day, still ask me which one to use.